Hello historians, today we're going to do Unit 4, Notes 6. This is about the Great War. So we're going to start by talking about the main causes of World War I. And what's convenient is that the word main also serves as an acronym for the causes that we're going to focus on. Europe in the early 1900s was a powder keg waiting for a spark that would result in an explosion of all-out war. In the early years of the 20th century, Europe hadn't seen a large-scale war between major European powers since the Napoleonic Wars nearly a century before. Tensions between the European empires were rapidly increasing. So some of the causes that we're going to look at are militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And these created the powder keg conditions of high tensions between European powers at the start of the 1900s. And there's a little spark. You notice it says assassination on this little match. The assassination of an imperial heir was the spark that led to the Great War. So let's start by looking at the letter M in our acronym, and it stands for militarism. In order to appear powerful and to protect their empires and territories, European nations saw a rise in militarism. Militarism is the glorification of military power. In the years leading up to the outbreak of war, European countries were building up their armies for self-protection, intimidation, and national glory. Germany also focused on increasing the size of their naval power in order to directly compete with Great Britain's powerful navy. As one nation would increase its military size, other countries felt pressure to increase their armies as well. Soon it was a race to have the largest and most powerful military. So up in your notes packet in the corner, one of the causes of World War I, you're going to write down for militarism. Countries were building up their militaries to intimidate. The A in our main causes of World War I stands for alliances. While each nation was building up their own militaries, many countries were also forming alliances or agreement with other nations to defend one another. Two major European alliances were formed in the years leading up to the Great War. The Triple Alliance was formed between Great Britain, France, and Russia. The Triple Entente formed between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, or Turkey. So you're going to write down for A, alliances, nations made agreements to protect and defend one another. If one nation in an alliance was attacked, the understanding was that the other ally nations would come to their defense and help fight their enemies. With such an entanglement of alliances, violence between two countries would quickly spread and involve all of Europe. Okay, in the background of this slide, you can see these are soldiers. These happen to be soldiers from India, and they are fighting for the British in World War I because of something we call imperialism. Kind of reminds me of Star Wars. Okay. European nations have been competing to expand their empires by controlling territories and establishing colonies around the world. We had once been a colony of Great Britain, okay, of the United Kingdom, and we didn't like being colonies after a while, and we fought for our independence. Okay, the United States had even started to expand when we gained territories in the Caribbean and Pacific after we fought the Spanish-American War. In your timeline, we're going to think back to when the United States was practicing imperialism with the Spanish-American War, so you can put that in your timeline for 1898. So for our notes in the letter I for imperialism, you write empires expanded their power over other regions. Territories colonized by imperialist powers were typically unhappy with the arrangement. Most wanted independence from their colonial powers. Many ethnic groups resented being governed by powerful faraway nations. So you can take a look at this map of the British Empire at the start of World War One. You can see here's Great Britain right here. And every other country that's in red, or territory that's in red, is a territory or colony controlled by Great Britain. So you can see India, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, lots of different parts throughout Africa. Okay, so you can see very quickly that if Britain gets involved in something, and they go to war, then all of their territories that they control also go to war to help them. When an imperialist power went to war, the territories and colonies that they controlled were also expected to fight with them. This is the reason we call World War I a world war, because European powers, even though fighting was going on here in Europe, it involves all of these colonies, and this is just the British Empire colonies. France has colonies throughout Africa and other parts of the world as well. Spain had colonies, okay? So all of these different European countries here had some colonies in other parts of the world, which makes this a world war. So here's a good example of some British propaganda here. So we've got Britain and then Australia and Canada, okay, South Africa. These are areas where that are controlled by Great Britain, and so they've got these other little puppies to help the big dog stare down the enemy. Okay, the N in our main causes of World War I acronym is standing for nationalism. Okay, as empires grew in size and power, people felt proud of their nation. Citizens were feeling more devoted to their home country. So for nationalism, people become more devoted and patriotic to their home nation. And now that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can be patriotic and proud to be an American or whatever country you're from. The problem is when you use nationalism as a way to bring violence upon somebody else. Okay, citizens of colonized territories and ethnic minority groups were also feeling patriotic to their ethnic group and rejecting a colonial authority. So countries that were governed by a faraway colonial power wanted to have independence, and that was becoming more and more of an issue. So these smaller countries wanted to govern themselves, and these tensions started to increase. For example, Serbians. Okay, here's Serbia, but there were people of Serbian ethnicity that were living all over this part of what we call the Balkan region in Europe. And Serbians living in the southeastern Balkan region of Europe were governed by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they resented that. They wanted to be their own nation. Nationalism inspired the Balkan people to have this burning desire to be independent from Austrian rule. So we have the powder keg ready to go. We've got the main causes. In June of 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife were visiting the Bosnian city of Sarajevo. Bosnia was controlled by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Franz was the heir to the throne. Most Bosnians were Serbs by ethnicity, and they wanted to be unified with neighboring Serbia. As Ferdinand's car drove through the streets of of Bosnia and Sarajevo, a man named Gavrilo Princip was a member of the Serbian nationalist group, and they were a part of the Black Hand movement. He jumped out of the crowd and shot the Archduke and his wife, and both of them died within minutes. You can see photographs and images of the Archduke and his wife, and this was the part of their funeral that's going on up here in the thought bubble. So he's holding the match, the assassination. He's the guy who kind of sparks this whole war. Austria-Hungary accused Serbia of being behind the assassination, and they declared war on Serbia. So Serbia has some big, powerful allies. Little tiny Serbia down there has some big, powerful allies with Russia and France has allies with Great Britain. Okay, this is the spark that set off the powder keg in Europe. So would you please write down for Archduke Franz Ferdinand? He was the Austro-Hungarian heir, and his assassination sparked World War I. And on the timeline ad for 1914, World War I began in Europe. Now at this point, this is just a war that's involving Europe and European powers. But of course, those powers have allies, and those powers have large militaries, and those powers have been imperialistic and have colonies that are going to help them fight. So it's going to quickly advance and spread throughout the world. Germany had had an alliance with Austria-Hungary and declared war on Serbia. Its leader, Kaiser Wilhelm, used this opportunity to move troops into its western border with France and Belgium. Russia had an alliance with Serbia and helped them fight Austria and Germany. Russia also had an alliance with Britain and France. By September of 1914, roughly 6 million soldiers were sent to war across Europe. There's Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, epic mustache going on right there. The war started with older methods of fighting. Armies rode in on horseback in cavalries, but new methods of fighting emerged in this industrialized era. For the 3 years, World War I was fought mostly in 600 miles of deeply dug trenches across France. Neither side was able to make much progress, resulting in a stalemate. So you're going to write down the Allies and Central Powers dug more than 600 miles of trenches through France. Trenches were infested with rats, lice, and diseases, and this led to a stalemate. We talked a lot in 6th grade about propaganda, specifically U.S. propaganda. We even analyzed a few different kinds of propaganda and talked about the different methods each kind of propaganda was using to try to influence people's opinion. Okay? To encourage support for the war effort, every one of the nations involved started using propaganda. Propaganda is an old method. It's not new. People were using propaganda as far back, for sure in the United States we used it to gain support for the colonists declaring independence from Great Britain. Propaganda is meant to influence people's opinion. In the U.S., most people were not interested in fighting Europe's messy war. Originally, here in the U.S., the propaganda discouraged war. It supported neutrality. The famous and popular song at the beginning of Europe's war here in the United States was a song called "I Didn't Raise My Boy to Be a Soldier." And it basically spoke to most Americans' desire to stay out, to be neutral. And we had this decision to remain isolationist. And that means to isolate our country and not let what's going on in the world impact how we interact and intervene. We got that all the way back from early on in this country with George Washington, and that was his perception was that the United States needs to be isolationist, and so we were trying to remain that way. Ultimately, though, as the stalemate continued and the war's events began to impact the United States, the message of our propaganda started to change. Would you please write down in your notes that for propaganda, all nations involved used propaganda to influence people's opinions about the war and motivate them into supporting the war in various ways. So, things like buying Liberty loans and going and signing up to enlist. Those are two different ways people could volunteer to help and support the war effort. At the start of World War I, European militaries approached warfare the way that they had fought in the old 19th century. However, it didn't take long to realize that this war would be far different. The Industrial Revolution had changed the way that people lived, and now it was going to change the way that nations fought. Okay. This is a photograph at the start of World War I. World War I was the first modern war. The traditional cavalry is going to be phased out at the start of the war. This is the war that they say they rode in on horses and flew out in airplanes, because the traditional cavalry ends up being phased out for the use of tanks. Airplanes had been invented just 15 years before the war, and now they were being used for scouting and fighting. That's the tanks. Airplanes. Submarines were firing torpedoes at iron ships. The machine gun could fire multiple rounds in just seconds instead of the how it used to take a single round rifles in the Civil War, like we had talked about. Now they've got machine guns that could fire multiple rounds in just seconds. Armies using barbed wire to fortify their trenches, and then poisonous gases like mustard gas and other chemical weapons were used, and they increased the death toll.